Hello and welcome to God in Film, the podcast where a Christian and an atheist dive into the best that cinema has to offer and see if we can find any parallels with the gospel or any other Bible stories. I'm media coordinator and grizzled old master, Giles Goff.
And I'm librarian and surprisingly powerful Padawan, Julia Hall.
We're looking at The Last Jedi, the controversial second film in the Star Wars sequel trilogy. We'll be looking at what the Jedi Code actually is, what is deconstruction, and what is the 180 rule. Julia, I think you might have some feelings about this film, and I want you to know from the off, this is a safe space, okay? This is a place to feel whatever you need to feel.
Yeah.
Would you like to say things now?
Yeah, I gave myself a little kind of bulletproof script to stick to, because otherwise I would go on a rant for 40 minutes. But the cliff notes is I don't love this film. Okay. For me, I thought the writing wasn't great. I think it relies way too heavily on MacGuffins and exposition. I don't think enough homework was done. So not my fave. In its defence, like, there is some valid criticism of this film, but a lot of the very, very loud criticism was entirely based on prejudice. You had too many people going, "Well, there's a girl in my Star Wars." Like, that's not a valid criticism of this film. Yeah. And it is better than Rise of Skywalker, but
most things are. Yeah,
that it's not really a bar so much as a ditch, but it is better than Rise of Skywalker. So.
I'm in a writing group, and whenever we get down on our own particular writing and be like, "Oh, this is terrible. This is really bad." Sooner or later, somebody will say, "Somehow Palpatine
returned." Yeah. So.
I'm not sure, but I think it was Ben Travis from Empire magazine who said that The Force Awakens is like a fantastic remix of the old hits, and The Last Jedi is the difficult concept album that you have to get your head around, you know?
Yeah. Like, Force Awakens, for me, it feels too safe. It's, this is just A New Hope 2.0. But considering, I think, the precedent that has been set in a few different fandoms over the years of fan and fan backlash kind of dictating a bit what filmmakers are doing, I do not blame J.J. Abrams for playing it safe.
Yeah. I think the depiction of Luke Skywalker was pretty brave.
Yeah, I'm wrangling with that still.
I can understand how frustrating it must be if you've waited however many years to see, like, Luke Skywalker at his most badass, and there he is sort of like fishing and drinking milk and just saying the Jedi suck, you know?
There are issues with this film, but the fact that Rian Johnson sat there and he looked at his storyboard and he was like, what does this film need? Oh yeah, it needs Luke Skywalker milking some nondescript alien and looking me in the eye while he drinks green milk. Why? I could have lived my life never witnessing that, never mind more than once. But, you do you.
As a general rule on this podcast, we're not here to sort of judge whether a film is good or bad, even though we might have some feelings about it. The thing for me that was the biggest letdown, I think, was Finn's storyline, because it didn't go anywhere. It felt like it was wasting time. When I talk about, like, an idea being flawed from a conceptual level, I think the idea of having J.J. Abrams take the franchise one way, Rian Johnson kind of yank the steering wheel and go over this direction, and then have J.J. be like, no, and try to yank it back. Yeah. And that's the thing that doesn't make any sense to me. It felt like Star Wars needed a Kevin Feige. And I thought
needed a clear direction.
I thought they had that with Kathleen Kennedy, because she's been in the position for donkey's years. She's only just left it now, I think, recently. So it seemed odd to me, like, if you're for something this important and for something so enmeshed in wider storytelling, you can't make this a director-led.
Yes, I think Rian Johnson was given too much room to play.
Here's what I want you to do just for the fun of it, okay? Do a quick Google search for me.
Yeah.
Type in The Last Jedi plus Giles Goff and tell me what you find.
Star Wars and the 180 rule.
The 180 rule. So,
oh my goodness.
So this is something I wrote from Media Magazine back in 2018. It's one of the few things that's kind of somehow leaked from behind the paywall because this college, Reigate College, have taken something I wrote and have turned it into like one of their set texts for teaching A-level media.
That is cool as hell.
So do you know what the 180 rule is?
I don't.
Okay.
Is this a Bible thing or is this a filmmaking thing?
This is a filmmaking thing,
right.
So we are absolutely sort of taking a little bit of a detour here, okay? So I want you to picture that there's two people in a room together facing each other, okay? And I want you to imagine that there is a line, an invisible line between the two of them, okay? Now the 180 rule says that the camera has to pick a side of that line, that imaginary line to be on, and it has to stay on that side within 180 degrees of that line. It can't go over the line, and the reason why is that if you and I are in this scene here, so I'm just going to move over this way, okay, and I want you to move in the other direction. So if I'm on the right hand side looking towards you, and you're on the left hand side looking right towards me, that reflects the sense of what it's like being a person in a physical space where you'd be looking at one person, they'd be looking that direction. Whereas if you move the camera to the other side, even though you and I would be physically apart from each other, on the screen we'd both be on the right hand side looking off to the left, and that's visually confusing for an audience. And the reason why this is important is the Force bond that Rey and Kylo Ren
bond, yes,
have.
the dyad of the Force.
Okay. But what's interesting is when they're communicating, they do the same sort of thing where Kylo Ren is, or like I say, he's on the right-hand side of the screen looking off to the left, and Rey is on the left-hand side looking off to the right. And it's like they are in the same room and the same space, having a conversation with each other, even though they're not, even though they are in a completely different space. And I've seen like telepathic rapport represented on screen before. So, for example, in Empire Strikes Back, when Luke falls through the vent after he's had his hand cut off, there's that moment where it comes in close up on Leia's face, and she's like, "No, he's here." And they're able to turn the Falcon around and find Luke just hanging off Cloud City and get him that way. And so this was the first time I've ever seen a psychic rapport of any kind be reflected like that. And it's a really novel, really beautiful bit of storytelling. So when I tell you that the concept is flawed for a lot of this, the concept might be, but the execution, the craft of filmmaking that goes into it.
And it's funny you should mention this, because one of my facts, if we are at a point where we can segue, is actually relevant to that, because...
Well, let's get into it then with Julia's facts.
My facts! This communication through the Force that Kylo and Rey do, although obviously their characters are many, many miles away, Adam Driver and Daisy Ridley always ensured that they were just off camera for each other's half of the conversation so that they'd have their scene partner
I love that.
to actually act against. And I think that shows.
Yeah.
It feels like a conversation as if they're in the same room.
That's a really generous way of being a scene partner. You know, like we spend time in the theatre, and obviously you're working with the people, but the idea that you come in on your days off to sort of help somebody else with their performance and make their performance pop when you've got a really busy schedule yourself, I find that really quite sweet. You know, it's a really generous form of acting.
Yeah, it's good for them. The Porgs in Star Wars, I think Star Wars has to have
I love the Porgs.
Like three main tenets. You need a good hero, you need a good villain, and you need a good little guy.
A little buddy.
Just a little guy. And the Porgs, I feel like this trilogy is like little guy.
Yeah.
But it was actually a solution to a problem that the crew encountered when they're filming. You might know this.
I think I do know this, yeah.
The planet that Luke goes to live on, Acto,
I just know it as Skellig Island. So.
is in Ireland, and the sheer amount of puffins that just exist there were massively getting in the way. But because puffins are a protected species, you can't move them.
No.
And so the porgs were used to digitally disguise the puffins.
Yeah.
So anytime you see a porg in the background, that's not a porg, that's a puffin.
I love it. You just kind of copy and paste a porg onto wherever the puffins have gone. It's brilliant.
I just love the scene where Chewie's about to eat one, and there's like this whole group that are like horrified that he's going to eat one of their mates, and then he feels bad. This film is the only film in the Skywalker saga, so all 9 films, not to audibly feature the line, "I have a bad feeling about this."
Really?
Yes. So, although Rian Johnson says it is in the film, but it's BB-8 who says the line.
Oh, okay.
So, hence why I've said audibly featured. I'm not sure at which point he says this, but according to Rian Johnson, he does.
Talk about a cop-out. Love it.
And then my last one is my favourite one. So, during the filming for this, John Boyega was on a really strict workout and diet regime. And one day when he was hungry, he ended up at Carrie Fisher's trailer, and he was lamenting to her, basically. He was sick of eating healthy. So she offered him chocolate bars and candy that she had stashed away in her fridge. Carrie Fisher. So since then, he would occasionally go to her trailer whenever he wanted a cheat day. And he later said, quote, "I failed my diet because Carrie Fisher told me to, and it felt great." Like Carrie Fisher.
The world got a bit darker when she left, didn't it?
It really did.
Is that your facts?
Those are my facts.
Nice. So we have covered the Star Wars franchise a few times and had guests on for it. But to be honest, I felt like, why am I going out to find a Star Wars expert when I can just use the Star Wars expert we've got at home?
Yeah. Star Wars is fine.
Star Wars is fine. So we've not got a guest for this episode. For any and all Star Wars questions will be directed to Miss Julia Hall for the foreseeable.
I will do my best.
Hey guys, it's Editing Giles here. Julia had a lot of feelings about this film. Too many feelings to fit into the main feed, actually. So what I've done is I've put the unedited version on our Patreon. So if you want to get into the absolute minutiae of the ways of the Force, the Jedi Code, and how long it takes you to travel to Canterbury, then go to www.patreon.com/The God in Film Podcast and sign up to our Bishop Waller-Bridge tier, where you can hear the extended episode of this one, as well as Patreon exclusives like our God in U2 and God in Gaming episode. There's also extended interviews, scripts, my notes from these episodes. And if you can't do any of that, then please leave us a review on Facebook, Spotify, Podbean, Apple Podcasts, The Surface of the Moon, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And now, back to the show. Julia, would you like to tell us about what the Jedi Code actually is?
I can give you a little bit of a history on the Jedi Order.
Okay.
For Star Wars, they use the Battle of Yavin, which is the blowing up the Death Star at the end of A New Hope, as their year zero.
Yeah.
So if I say things like 20 BBY, that's 20 years before the Battle of Yavin, or 5 ABY is 5 years after the Battle of Yavin. So
Abby or baby?
Bibi or Abby or Bibi?
Abby or Bibi? Abby. Bibi.
Yeah. Settle in, folks. Grab your snacks, grab your drink. I'm going to be yapping for a while. It starts about 25,000 years BBY. So it's a very, very, very old order.
Yeah, okay.
And the early stages of the Jedi Order is mostly a lot of fighting. So the very first Sith Lord actually comes from inside the Order itself, because they're like, I don't like the way you're doing things.
Gosh, so I wonder where that, as a Christian, I wonder where that sort of feeling comes from.
I know, that's so unrealistic. Good job this is science fiction.
Yeah. I'm just picturing a Sith Lord now, nailing his 95 theses to him.
So you have the Force Wars, which leads into the Great Sith War. And eventually, after some of their original temples are destroyed, the Jedi relocate to Coruscant. And that's sort of the Old Republic era.
Yeah.
And then once you get past that, you get into the sort of golden age of the Jedi Order, which is the High Republic era.
Okay.
So this is about 500 to 100 BBY.
Oh, so quite late in the day then, really.
Honestly, the Jedi, like, they have beef with everyone. There's a huge war between the Jedi and the Mandalorians that Mandalorians, like, or engineer their entire stuff to wreck Jedi at every possible...
I mean, we've met the Mandalorians. They're not people you want to go on any long car drives with, you know?
No.
I'm not entirely confident that all of the Jedi are people you want to go on a long car journey with either, you know? They feel a little bit smug, is how they come across sometimes.
Yes, yeah. So when we get to the High Republic, which is 500 to 100 BBY, this is like the pinnacle. So you've got Jedi building temples all across the galaxy.
Yep.
They're exploring into the Outer Rim for the first time. They're creating hyperspace lanes. So their place in the galaxy is wayfinders, diplomats, sort of acting as mediaries in conflicts between planets. They're judges, they're warriors if the need should arise, but they're mostly peacekeepers to an extent.
The Jedi are not soldiers. Am I reading that right?
Yeah, they don't choose to view themselves as soldiers, but they are very closely tied to the Republic.
He's called General Kenobi a lot of the time, you know?
Yeah, they end up in the Clone Wars and they're very much soldiers then.
Yeah, they're kind of folded into the military in that respect.
More on that to come, because that's where it gets juicy. But even if... So you have some members of the Jedi Order who aren't actually Jedi themselves. So if you, as a Padawan... So as a Padawan, if you fail your test to become a Jedi Knight... you're still, you've still got some training in the Force. You then get reassigned as part of the sort of wider network of the Jedi Order. So you might become a doctor or a teacher, or they also have an agricultural corps. So you basically go to a planet and you help like the plants grow using the Force, right? And explorers and stuff. So even though you're not a Jedi Knight, but you're part of the Jedi Order with Jedi training.
It just seems odd to me that you would, for something that's all about like balance and the Force, that you would put the knights, effectively the sort of military as the high echelon of that little substrata. You know, it seems odd to me.
Within knights, you have guardians, you have seers, and you have sentinels, I believe. So guardians are your Jedi warriors, so like Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi, they're guardians, I believe. Your seers are usually kind of your healers and your thinkers.
Okay.
So you might be the rank of Jedi Knight, but never actually leave the temple because your job is looking after holocrons or reading books or, studying the text to kind of...
Okay.
Does that make sense? And then sentinels are explorers, so they go out and they're feet on the ground. They're the diplomats and the boots on the ground that aren't fighting, basically. So most of the Jedi that survive Order 66 are the Sentinels, because they're not fighting and they're not hanging out in the library. They're out in the wider galaxy. So
I used to have a T-shirt, I think I've still got it somewhere, that says "Execute Order 66" on it, and just nice red lettering. It was like my geek detector T-shirt, you know.
If you knew, you knew. So the Order are generally, if they have a really good reputation in the core worlds where the Republic is sort of most respected, so like Alderaan, Corellia, Coruscant, those kinds of places. But the further out you go, the less trusted they are, because again, how can you really claim to be impartial when you're literally working for/with the Republic?
I look for like real world analogues of what the Jedi are, and it feels like they kind of keep flipping through different things. Like sometimes they're the Knights of the Round Table.
Yeah.
And sometimes they're like Buddhist monks. And then somewhere along the way, they become like a representation of colonialism somewhere in there.
Yeah, like, I think it's worth mentioning that Jedi take kids away from their families at like tiny tot age. Like, really young.
And that didn't work out very well. You know,
it didn't work out for some people. And I think, obviously, it depends on your perspective. Like, if you're some dirt farmer on Dantooine and some guy rocks up and goes, hey, your kid has got powers, I think I can give him a better life in the Jedi Order, then obviously that would depend on the parent. But I think some parents would go, you know what, if you can give him a better life elsewhere... It's a tricky one, because I don't know how much of a choice.
I think it is that tricky.
The non-parent.
I like
speaking,
this because this is one of those weird times where you have to defend the indefensible, and I just get to be like, I think this sounds a bit sketch to me.
Yeah, I think it's very easy to go, oh, well, if I had a kid, but you don't know till you do. But if you're someone living in abject poverty and some guy goes, I think I can give your kid a better life, then I think it would depend on the parent. But I can't say for certain how voluntary Jedi selection is. Whether it's a case of your kid is force sensitive, yoink, have a good day, so the Jedi Order are by no means perfect, and we definitely see that when we get to the beginning of the prequels. So this is about 20 years BBY, and the prequel films do cover this, but I will recap it again for those of you who don't want to sit through Attack of the Clones again.
Hey. Attack of the Clones is a film about falling in love with Natalie Portman. Of course you want to watch it. Don't be ridiculous.
I mean, the outfits are gorgeous. I will admit, actually. She doesn't miss. So, as political tensions rise, the Clone Wars break out.
I mean, broadly speaking, the whole Clone Wars thing is a massive, effectively like a false flag operation where you've got
it's an interesting one.
Both sides being played by the same guy, and it's a way of consolidating power.
Clone troopers, much the same with the stormtroopers in the sequel films, have behavior inhibitor chips, basically conditioning and programming. So Sidious changes
based on Jango Fett. Jango asks for one clone that's completely just untouched. That's Boba, and that's where we get that.
So Sidious basically hijacks that programming and those chips to then basically have a sleeper army that he can call on whenever he wants.
There's a little sort of backdoor program execute.
Yes, yeah.
Order 66. Yeah, okay.
Palpatine wins. Darth Vader gets a cool new suit. The Jedi Order falls into darkness, like we know the rest. So, mostly, there is a quote I would like to share. Actually, this is from a Star Wars novel. This is Mask of Fear, and Mon Mothma says this line, and she's describing the Jedi Order, and I think it kind of encapsulates it quite nicely. But she says, "The Jedi were good, like all of us. They failed to secure the peace. They were drawn into the war like everyone else, and their hands were not clean. But for thousands of years they could have ruled the galaxy, and instead they chose to serve. They had their own vested interests, their own ways of politicking, but they believed their power came with an obligation to live humbly, to do good without asserting authority. Maybe they failed to live up to those ideals in the end, but they were good, and they were ordinary, and they were fallible. And even the most smug and arrogant were trying to hew a tradition older than the Republic."
Very nice.
Mon Mothma never misses.
Yeah.
So,
fantastic.
In terms of what the Order actually preached, a couple of themes that I'm going to explore. So there's the concept of the 3 pillars.
Okay.
And there's the code itself. So the book I showed you earlier, this is the Jedi Path. This has basically been my sacred texts.
Okay.
This came out 2016, so it might not be canon anymore.
Okay.
And if I quote anything, that's the book that I'm quoting.
Okay.
So we start with the pillars, which are force, knowledge, and self-discipline. With the force, the Jedi differentiate between 2 aspects, which is living force and unifying force or cosmic force. So living force is the tangible force abilities, such as, quote, running, jumping, heightened senses, moving objects, or soothing the emotions of others. And whenever Luke's going, reach out and feel and think, this is connecting to the living force.
Okay.
That energy, that kind of the circle of life, basically, that's all living force stuff. And then you have the unifying force, which is the cosmic destiny, big picture force stuff. So force ghosts is a unifying force power. Other things also can become possible. So, quote, temporarily leave your body behind, walk into the past or see the future, even to transcend death. It's not outside the realm of possibility for most of the Force powers, as they're shown in this film, are not outside the realm of possibility for what the Force is actually capable of.
Yeah.
Our second pillar is knowledge. Generally, the Jedi place great emphasis on learning not just the history of the Order and the philosophy of the Order, but things like physical sciences, geography, natural biology, political landscapes, especially of planets that you're kind of assigned to. And the Jedi Temple, especially the one on Coruscant, holds a massive library which both in books and holocrons, which are basically like memory sticks, I guess, that have Jedi history and teachings and things in them.
Okay.
And then your third pillar is self-discipline.
Okay.
And the key skill for this pillar is meditation. So in the book, they said that initiates should expect to meditate at least 5 times a day, but like basically you should be meditating all the time.
This is like that you should always be praying sort of thing.
Last little bit, I promise, we're going to look at the Jedi Code itself, which is split into 5 kind of precepts. So the first one is, there is no emotion, there is peace. That's number 1. So this is a reminder that Jedi should act without recklessness and view the actions of others through the pure lens of the Force.
Okay.
Number 2, there is no ignorance, there is knowledge. A reminder that ignorance often leads to fear, and fear is one of the primary paths to the dark side.
Fear leads to hate.
Hate leads to anger, anger leads to suffering, the whole kit and caboodle.
Yeah.
Number 3, there is no passion, there is serenity.
Yeah.
Number 4, there is no chaos, there is harmony. So this is a reminder that through perceiving the structure of the Force, chaos and seemingly random acts become clear and purposeful. I feel like this is kind of the God works in mysterious ways. And then last but not least, there is no death, there is the Force. So all that lives must die. We're all part of an energy larger than ourselves that sometimes outstrips our understanding.
Okay.
So there's the big thing I feel that we have to talk about with the Jedi Order is their personal beef with attachments.
Yeah.
They don't like these attachments. Their reasoning being that these kinds of relationships, and it's not necessarily just romantic relationships like Anakin and Padme, but it can also be like platonic relationships. So the bond between Grogu and Din Djarin, as dad and son, basically, is the primary reason that Luke doesn't seek to train Grogu any further, because he's too attached to his dad.
It blew my mind when I saw that in The Mandalorian, that Luke is sort of doing that thing of like, now, Grogu, you can choose between the thing, or you can have this little metal shirt which will make you basically invincible to the, and that represents choosing your dad, and you have to choose. I'm like, have we learned nothing? I think one of the saddest things is Luke doesn't get to sit down and watch the prequel trilogy with the rest of us, you know? And I feel like that's really interesting when you look at that Luke Skywalker and then you juxtapose him with the Luke Skywalker we got in Last Jedi, because we're seeing somebody who, by that point, he is the Last Jedi there, and he's trying to bring an order back to life. And what he's trying to do is go, well, this worked really well for 2,500 years or however long, and he's not questioning it, he's not criticizing it, he's not, and with my teacher hat on, it's that thing of going, well, this is the way it's always been done, and it's always worked this way, rather than actually criticizing it and saying, well, is this still the best way to do this, you know? Yeah.
And it's the thing with attachments is, on the one hand, if you're thinking about, oh, if I go on this mission, you know, is my wife going to be safe? Oh, it becomes, as we've seen very clearly in the prequels, it becomes leverage for intense emotions such as fear, such as greed, such as jealousy, that will mean that you can't act rationally. But on the flip side, that might be fine if you're a 900-year-old Yoda, for example, and you see a lot of people, you know, live and die, and you kind of get used to that. But for people with short lifespans, it's not that easy. And you also get a lot of Jedi who take this not too far, but one thing that, if you read Karen Travers' books that are set during the Clone Wars, you get a lot of these Jedi generals who are not attached to their clone squads because they're replaceable. Yeah. And forming attachments is not.
Yeah,
and so you get these very smug, very aloof Jedi that actually are not likable, which is why George Lucas didn't like her books very much. So again, it's not a perfect system by any means, and it can definitely become exploited, as we've very much seen. There were 3 whole films about it as a blow by blow of how to take down the Jedi Order.
But this is something we see in in the real world, effectively, the sense of if you want to sort of follow God fully and completely, that you have to be celibate and you have to be so you're not don't have any distractions from focusing on God, which is like, just so we're clear, Jesus didn't say you had to do that. St. Paul says you have to do that, or he didn't even say you have to. He says, well, you guys can get married if you want to.
You know how I feel about Paul.
I'm going to be. We will get to it. Don't worry. I've got a whole episode lined up for Paul. Okay. He says, like, you guys can get married if you want to. I'm going to do this. It's formed the basis for a lot of the Catholic Church, where priests aren't able to get married and they're not able to have those attachments, and that's created massive problems down the line as well. You know. So, how are you feeling now?
I'm feeling good. Good. Yeah, I have some thoughts about Luke and Luke's kind of rebuilding of the Order, but I think you've got some thoughts.
Well, I think that's a great time to get into finding the faith in the film.
Ba-ba.
So, as always with Star Wars, I'm conscious that this isn't really my fandom, so I try to be as respectful as possible. So, I'm going to draw out what I think is a parallel, and you can tell me if you think I'm right or wrong. But I think this film might just be the best depiction of deconstruction that I think I've ever seen. We have talked about deconstruction probably in passing in previous episodes. I feel like, honestly, that this podcast has basically been my watching my kind of deconstruction go on here, and I wanted to take one episode to just look at it in full and try and ask what exactly is this. Okay, so faith deconstruction, known as deconstructing your faith, or religious deconstruction, or simply deconstruction, is a process during which religious believers re-examine and question their beliefs. It originated in American evangelicalism, where it may be called evangelical deconstruction. The term rose to popularity in connection with the ex-evangelical movement, which began in 2016. And it's sometimes called the deconstruction movement. Subsequently, the term religious deconstruction has been applied to other religions as well, but I don't know, you can find another podcast for those. So during deconstruction, people tend to doubt their beliefs, identity, and practices. They may struggle, they might experience anxiety, and some eventually then modify their beliefs into something more satisfactory to the believer. And it can result in a rejection of religion for some and a revised or renewed faith for others. So I remember we'd looked at Zach Lambert in detail at one point, and he sort of came up with the metaphor of, like, you've built a house, and deconstruction is basically taking each brick out, looking at the brick and asking yourself, does this element, does this thing still hold up? Do I still believe this specific thing? And then if it works for you, great, put it back in. And if it doesn't, chuck it out. So for me, I grew up in that world, that sort of creationist world where evolution is just a theory and it's not really a thing, and science is lying to you and it's put there to deceive you. And it was as late as like 2010, I had a moment and I was like literally at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival watching a show, and I'm like, no, there's too much here. There's too much here for this to not be a real thing. So if you've made creation a central pillar of your belief, if you take that out, then the whole thing can fall down. But for me, when I'm able to get to this point of going, well, the creation story, I think, whilst I think God could make the world in 6 days if he wanted to, I don't think he did. You know, I think the creation story, Adam and Eve, is a beautiful allegory that explains a central concept really well to a 1,000 years BC civilization. And it's not, the creation story isn't an attempt to sort of like science your way into how the world came to be. The creation story is basically trying to show the world that the God of Israel is the one true God, you know, not Baal or not any other fake gods that are rolling around at this time, you know. So once I was able to do that and go, okay, well, whenever I come to a belief and I question it, I always ask myself, okay, well, does this impact whether I think Jesus was real? No. Does it impact whether I think he was the Son of God? No. Does it impact whether I think he died and rose again? No. And then, okay, well, if that's the case, I can hold this view quite lightly. Do you know what
Yeah,
I mean?
yeah.
You know?
It's like Marie Kondoing, but for like your spirituality. Like, does this spark joy? And if it doesn't, you say thank you, and then
Yeah.
you move it along.
Yeah, basically. And you do this with various different bits and bobs. You know, you look at different things and you say, well, do I really believe that? This doesn't make sense to me. And we've talked about the story of Job, one of the oldest
Yes.
books in the Bible, and how that didn't make sense. It makes sense beautifully as a story. It doesn't make sense as an actual thing that actually
Yes.
happened, you
Yeah.
know? So this is the kind of thing. Now, some of the outcomes, psychologist Daryl R. Van Tongeren catalogued three possible outcomes of following deconstruction. So he described it as like religious reconstruction, which is retaining or rebuilding religious faith, often with a shift in religious identity. Some people who can reconstruct report a feeling of spiritual growth and maturity. That's probably where I would say I am. Now. Some people make a distinction between Christians and Christ followers, because when the label Christian has been used to mean socially conservative, oppressive, and the rest of it, it's quite hard to claim that
Yes. Yeah.
title. I'm not ready to give up on that title yet, because Christian, it means like little Christ. It's and Christ follower just has too many syllables in it and just feels a little bit on the clunky side,
Yeah, it feels a bit culty. I don't know.
You are a follower of Christ, but it's the same as calling myself a disciple of Christ. It's like it's fine, but I've got this term. This term has done me well for the past 30 years, so I think I'll stick with it. It's that kind of vibe. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
And then there's religious de-identification, which is a reduction in religious identity or religious beliefs, and so that can like not believing core tenet of the religion, and then sort of transitioning into being an atheist or an agnostic, disengagement from emotional connection with the spiritual or divine, or a discontinuous of religious rules. So you're seeing people who are like ex-pastors or ex-evangelical and stuff like that,
Yeah.
So that's where it can be. I don't see deconstruction as an inherently threatening thing. We've talked about that faith is a bit like at a certain point you have to question stuff.
Yes.
Because if you don't, then your faith calcifies. You don't. It stops becoming a relationship and it just becomes dogma.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's a reasonably elegant analogues here for what is going on with Luke and the Force and the Jedi in Last Jedi. So tell me if I'm wrong on any of these things, okay? But because the way it's presented as, I'd say, inherently kind of supernatural, I'm going to be thinking of the Force as like an analog for God in this, as a sort of
I mean, the Force itself can influence things and make decisions in a sense. It's like Anakin is born of the Force.
Yeah. Well, I was going to get to that. So
like,
it connects to all life.
It needed a hard reset.
It connects to all life. It binds everything in the universe. Plus, there's the existence of Force ghosts, which indicates that through the Force, people can experience a conscious individual life after death. And at the other end of the scale, the Force is responsible for at least one virgin birth, when the midichlorians are off the scale. Now, it's not seen as one specific divine being like the God of the Bible. And while I'm conscious that it might be a closer fit for concepts in other religions, this is a Christianity-based podcast, so we're going to focus on that because otherwise I don't know what I'm talking about, So then growing up, I always used to think that the Jedi and the Force were inextricably linked. And again, not a massive Star Wars fan. I've seen all the films, and that'll do me fine, And that you couldn't have the Force without being a Jedi, But since Disney bought Lucasfilm and we've had an absolute explosion of Star Wars media, we've seen Force users who aren't Jedi. For example, we've seen Maz Kanata. I want to say the Guardians of the Kyber Temple. And then, I can't even remember if I'm pronouncing it. Chirrut Imwe from Rogue One.
Oh, yes, yeah. I'm one with the Force
Force one with me, yeah. And that idea that you could have a connection to the Force without being Jedi trained and all that sort of stuff. I'm sure you can come up with like a dozen more examples, but the idea that you can be connected to the Force without being a Jedi was quite eye-opening. And the reason that's relevant is that if the Jedi aren't the only way to access the Force, then it opens up a really interesting parallel here. You'd be proud of me. I have done my research here. So the Jedi Code restricted members of the Jedi Order from forming personal relationships, although the code encouraged compassion for life. It prohibited romantic love due to the risks of attachment, such as fear and loss. So that is from Wikipedia.
Good old Wikipedia.
And I accessed it on the 9th of February, 2026. So, like, going back to the way you'd have to reference things for an essay, you know? So, and there's that gorgeous line that Luke says to Rey, the Force does not belong to the Jedi. To say that if the Jedi dies, the light dies is vanity.
Yeah. And that is spot on the money, to be fair.
Yeah. So, God does not belong to Christianity. How can I put this? We belong to him. He doesn't belong to us.
Like his existence isn't sustained by Christians.
Yeah. I have never felt the need that I have to defend God, because that to me has always felt like a gnat trying to defend an elephant. He's like, no, I'm fine. I got this. This is not
okay,
big,
bro. I got
it's all right. This is not a big deal for me, you know? And the thing I enjoy most about Luke is, in this depiction at least, is that Luke is a person who is deconstructing what it means to be a Jedi, what it means to be connected to the Force, and he's looking at the Jedi Order, I would argue, in the most clear-eyed way possible. He's grappling with the uncomfortable truths of what exactly the Jedi are responsible for. And I think for a lot of fans out there, that is really uncomfortable, you know?
Yeah.
That's I
myself, actually, I feel like I did quite a lot of deconstructing when I rewatched this film again, because what I actually think happened is when I first watched these films, I watched them as they came out, and I watched The Rise of Skywalker, and it kind of poisoned my memory of the other two. So my brain went, oh, Last Jedi is bad. Okay, why is it bad? And so the hours I spent on Reddit subthreads and Wikipedia going, okay, let's look at this. Well, what does that mean? And I could talk about just that for hours, but I won't. But it led me to kind of go through and go, okay, where does this film fail? Where does this film succeed? A lot of the very vocal stuff was, oh, Luke's characters, this has ruined Star Wars. Yeah. Oh, this has completely destroyed the canon. No, it hasn't. Luke's journey at the end, projecting himself through the Force, does it destroy and ruin the canon? No. Does it throw some of it into question? Yes.
Well, this is kind of one of the most beautiful things that how can I put this? That I feel like watching you wrestle with that is like how Christians wrestle with a lot of things, where you think something you didn't think was possible, where you've believed one thing for so long, and then you have a new piece of information brought into it, and that makes you feel uncomfortable for a long time, you know?
But the thing with Luke is that, okay, if you could just project yourself through the Force, which that is possible. There's canon, there's earlier canon instances of this, of creating projections and illusions of yourself. Over that distance, questionable, but for the son of Anakin Skywalker...
Not questionable, because it happened. It happened in a film that was canon. So this is my point, is that this is how one of the things that you have in common with conservative Christians, you know? You're seeing something happen in front of your very eyes, and you've been told and led to believe this thing can't happen.
I mean, yeah, but then and also Finn and Rose travelled to Cantonica and back in less than 18 hours, and I watched that happen in the film, but that is not possible.
Yeah, I'm not talking about Cantonica right now.
It's one of those where I think
we have seen this. We've seen this happen in, as I've said, in Star Trek, in Star Wars, in Game of Thrones. Sometimes distances get squished down because plot.
They really do.
There's this quote from the film. I've condensed some of it. So Luke says to Rey, "Now that they're extinct, the Jedi are romanticized, deified. But if you strip away the myth and look at their deeds, the legacy of the Jedi is failure, hypocrisy, hubris. At the height of their powers, they allowed Darth Sidious to rise, create the Empire, and wipe them out. It was a Jedi Master who was responsible for the training and creation of Darth Vader. And then Rey jumps back in with, and a Jedi who saved him. Yes, your father was the most hated man in the galaxy. He caused so much death and destruction for many years, but you saw there was conflict inside of him. You believed that he wasn't gone, that he could be turned. And I became a legend. For many years there was balance, and then I saw Ben, my nephew, with that mighty Skywalker blood, and in my hubris, I thought I could train him. I could pass on my strengths. Han was Han about it. But Leia trusted me with her son. I took him and a dozen students and began a training temple. By the time I realized I was no match for the darkness rising in him, it was too late. Now this is... How can I put this? You can love somebody and still see all their flaws.
Yeah.
And you can hate somebody and still have some idea as to why they are like that, still have sympathy for why they're like that. And often when it comes to family, those two things are the same, you know? Mm-hmm. I think the fact that Luke is talking about his dad here, you know, his dad is a war criminal.
An
exponential level, you know?
He's committed like 3 genocides.
Before breakfast, you know?
Like... Yeah.
There's that bit where Padme is saying he can be saved, and Obi-Wan is going like, Padme, it's not even his first genocide.
Yeah, like he did, like he's done this before, and that was, you know, before he became a Sith Lord.
He has, but again, he was. You have a child who is, if we use sort of modern parlance, we'd say this is a child who's a slave. He's been trafficked about here and there.
Yep.
He is essentially sold into the Jedi Order, and his mum doesn't have a whole lot of say about it.
No.
So you take somebody who is already vulnerable and you make them even more vulnerable. You tell them to squash down their feelings. We have talked about this in Toxic Masculinity.
He needed therapy
the cows
so bad.
And then you give him a lightsaber and you teach him to fight. And I'm reminded of the Julia quote, those who aren't fed love from spoons will learn to lick it from knives.
Mm-hmm. I didn't come up with that. I do want to clarify. I read that on Tumblr.
But I like to think you popularised it. Yeah. So when there's an artificial threat developed for him, somebody is able to come in and groom him, and it ends up being bad for the entire galaxy.
Yeah.
And it's like, how can I put this? I love Obama. Great bunch of lads, yeah? But there are people who have to ask quite legitimately, would we have the situation with Trump if you hadn't made that joke about him at a White House press dinner, you know? Would we have ICE agents running all over the place if we hadn't had 8 years of them gradually being built up in the Obama thing? So you, as well as looking at our heroes and saying to them how great they were and how wonderful they were, we also have to ask ourselves, to what extent are they responsible for some of the bad things that happened on their watch?
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of things I dislike about this, and especially that passage. One is, I love a moment of weakness flaw in any character. I think that's always really interesting. But this growing darkness in Ben is never specified, and it's never truly explained what that is. Because for Anakin, it was that obsessive need to protect Padme and keep her alive.
Yeah.
That was what fueled him, right? So we don't know what fuels Ben. So we don't know what this growing darkness is, and it kind of suggests that there is a predisposition to the dark side because his granddad was Darth Vader.
Yeah.
I'm going to say it. That's not how the Force works. For me, this is the same man who, you know, on the Death Star 2, wherever it was, looks at Darth Vader, who is, like, I think because the films are as old as they are now, the originals, and I think because Darth Vader has been parodied and kind of he's become sort of pop culture, I think a lot of his gravitas is lost a little bit.
Yeah.
But Darth Vader is terrifying. He is the bogeyman of the galaxy. I think
we certainly see that in Rogue One, don't we?
Yeah, the corridor scene in Rogue One, he is this probably the second most evil man in the galaxy, right? And Luke looked at him and went, there's goodness in him, and I think that I can redeem him. When he's just been through a million dogfights, he's seen firsthand the war that this man has created, and he still goes, no, I think I can redeem him. And so for him to look at Ben and go, oh, that's really scary darkness there, it seems counterintuitive, because it's like, you've done this before. You've done this before in probably the most stressful situation like ever, and here you have it again at a point where you're not at war, where you can actually sit down and go, hey, look, Ben, can you want to talk about your feelings?
Yeah, but this, okay.
Like,
the person that Luke is at 21 isn't the person that Luke is at 40, you know?
Yeah.
There is something else to be able to look at someone with radical forgiveness, really radical forgiveness, you know? The kind that is incredibly challenging, the kind that you can't ask of anybody and do that. And then there's being responsible for somebody and seeing that. And I mean, you know, obviously with so many of these things, there wasn't enough time spent on it. For me,
Ben's fall to the dark side was not, even in the first film, was not adequately explored.
Okay, but I could understand how, if somebody is of that lineage and you're being told just how powerful you are, and we see this happen with people who are the children of like serial killers or war criminals or rest of it. You ask yourself, is part of that darkness in me?
Yeah.
Is it easier to sort of fight it, or to sort of just give into it, like a to be or not to be kind of, you know? But also the with Kylo Ren, with Ben Solo, the brittleness of him is always there. You know, he's such
a little broody emo boy.
He's so fragile. He's so flaky. And also, like, sometimes in the nature-nurture debate, it is just nature. Sometimes somebody is just like that, and you can't...
Yeah,
you can't turn them around, no matter how kind and loving you want them to be, because that's how free will works, you know?
Yeah.
The one thing I did want to talk about was obviously the last bit where he does the force projection. He takes on all of the First Order.
Yeah. With a laser sword.
That little sort of like flicking it off. And what I saw there was, again, if we keep the metaphor going, that you can go through this process. You can deconstruct all your beliefs. You can look at the history of Christianity over the last 2,000 years and go, yeah, there was some stuff there that was really not okay.
Some shady stuff.
And you can be one of the most powerful, one of the most effective, I can't think of a better way to put it, warriors for God, warriors for Christ in this situation, you know? And you can do it without breaking the sweat, and you can do it without hurting anybody. You can do it, you can sort of help to protect the things that you love and things that need protecting. And seen in that light, deconstruction shouldn't be something we should be scared of. The only people who should be scared of deconstruction are church pastors who are worried that their tithing is going to go down. You know, nobody else should be fussed about it. So I'm going to leave it there. How do you feel?
I feel okay. Like I could still yap about a great deal, many things. But you can rest now. It's okay.
Okay.
I'll just rant at Daniel when he gets home.
I'd like to take a quick moment to say a thank you to our Patreon patrons: Sarah Cooper, Jonathan Wattis, James Pittard, Simon Seller, Philip Coleman, Lance Kane, and one Natalie Faye Miniker. Thank you so much for supporting us, guys. I know we've got no shortage of Star Wars fans in that list of people, so I hope you appreciated this quite rambly episode. Our next episode will be 3 billboards outside Ebbing, Missouri, and I'm really looking forward to getting into that one. I really sincerely hope it'll be shorter than this episode.
I think this is the can of worms season.
Fantastic.
For sure.
Okay, ladies and gents, we will see you next episode. Julia, have you had a good time?
I've had a good time. I've had a learned time. Does that make sense? Like, you know, I feel that this is the one episode where the thing that we're talking about is actually occurring in real time, and you can see it happen alongside the explanations. So I think it's been a very informative episode.
Definitely. Okay, ladies and gents, we'll see you soon. Bye.
Bye-bye. God in Film is hosted and created by Giles Scott.
That's me.
Mixing and editing by Giles. Our logo was designed by
Julie Walsh.
And our theme tune was composed by
Rick Lee.
Waffle editing by
Natalie Miniker
and
Phil Coleman.
Please rate and review.
Please give us 5 stars because that's a nice thing to do.